Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our webinar, Plan to Evolve, Securing Your M365 Content, featuring our special guest, Steve Dolby. My name is Ivan, and I'm a sales manager here at Syskit. And today we are joined by Steve, our star of the day, and my colleague Mattia, who will be showing you a demo of Syskit Point. Many of you already knows us as a company, but for those who don't, let me briefly introduce you to Syskit. Syskit is a software development company founded more than 13 years ago. We developed products for Microsoft 365 governance, security, and auditing, as well as for SharePoint on-prem administration. We currently have more than 3,000 customers around the world. We offer 4 products, including our famous SP-Docket for SharePoint on-prem documentation, as well as Syskit Point for Microsoft 365 governance and management. Before we start, just a few housekeeping rules. All registrants will receive a recording of the webinar within a few days. Throughout Steve's presentation, we will have a few short demos of Syskit Point showing how it can help you secure your M365 content. And after the presentation, we will then have a Q&A session where Steve will answer any questions you might have. Please use the Q&A function on the right side of the screen to ask your questions throughout the webinar. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest. Steve Dolby has been speaking, consulting, and teaching SharePoint, cloud, security, and an M365 know-how on intelligent content management forever. Today, he spends most of his time helping customers define and adopt cloud and enterprise content management through digital transformation. With nearly 20 years in implementing collaboration and content management, you will not miss Steve's passion for implementing technology with a lot of business value. You can also catch Steve talking all things Office 365 on his podcast, Office 365 Distilled. And without further ado, I will now give a warm welcome and turn things over to Steve. Steve, are you ready?
We are ready, I think.
Great.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I just need to click a few buttons here and show the right screen and show the right one. Good. Seems to be all working. So hopefully you can see the right screen. So what are we actually doing? We are going to look at securing your content in the context of kind of planning to evolve. So I'm just going to make sure I can see myself in the right way here. Good. So planning to evolve, it's a series of talks that I put together where we live in a world where nothing is stable in terms of certainly Microsoft 365. And of course, in the past few years, that's kind of proven the case that things are flexible, that things have to move on and those kinds of things. So we're looking at how we can evolve our security, because even though we think our security stays the same, it doesn't, of course. It constantly changes and it's getting more and more complex. So what we're going to do is take a look at 3 areas of security. We're going to start in the very basics at one end and understand how the layers build up. And then we're going to drop into the Syskit product to be able to sort of look 2 or 3 times throughout the presentation how these tools are able to decipher what can be a fairly complex environment. So just a quick few words about me. As I said, you've just seen the introduction. Yeah, too many years in IT, certainly years in SharePoint. I was part of a group of people that saw Tahoe when it first came out a long time ago, and I've been in that space ever since, focusing very much on kind of knowledge management and that kind of stuff. You'll see us playing around on Office 365 Distilled. If that's a podcast that you listen to, then you will have heard us talking about certainly this evolution and the way things change constantly. But it's a very chilled out podcast. It's really about a conversation more than anything else. We kind of call it 2 guys at a bar. You know, we enjoy our whiskey, talking tech. And so if you want to catch that, have some fun, then please go ahead. So what are we doing? Well, we're evolving. We all evolve. Our technology evolves. We evolve as people. The work we do, businesses all evolve. Now, what does evolve actually mean? Well, it's kind of a glide path to improvement, a willingness to get better, to try and improve. And I'm sure we do that as our careers, as we move on. And of course, we do that in all of things M365. I'm a little bit sad, really. I do Microsoft 365, drink whiskey, and I watch Formula One, and look after my family, of course. But at Microsoft 365, I'm always looking at a better way for that tool in business. And so when it comes to security, we need to evolve that security continually, taking the most acceptable solutions that we can find, evolve into something that is measurable and trackable. And if security is inconvenient, maybe it's the wrong choice. But of course, remember that choice is variable. So those 5 words, continual, acceptable, measured, choice, and variable, they're all involved in how we evolve our security and how we move forward, etc., etc. So that's the kind of thing we're going to be looking at as we move forward. So we're going to go down 3 basic paths today. We're going to understand what defense is. So we're going to go to the very basics of security, to what actually brings it together, because it's understanding those basics that you understand and how the security is put together. So if you have a problem, you understand the basic building blocks. We're going to look at something around how you build those layers and how you control it through governance. And on each of these layers, we look at security and evolving protection. But as we do each of these levels, we're going to break off and we're going to take a look at the SysKit and how it can actually help you decipher the security issues and how you protect your content. What we need to understand is that security is a process. It's a process that you put in place. Okay, you build from it. When SharePoint first came out, when we talk about some of the tools that are knowledge management based tools, security was relatively simple in that the layers were quite low. You did this and you got this. But as Microsoft have developed this into the ecosystem that is Microsoft 365, then those layers are starting to interchange with each other and actually can take away some of that simplicity. So we're going to look at the basics. We're going to look at how we add some depth to that defense. And if you've done security, you guys will know what defense in depth means. And then we're going to understand where we are with governance. And then we're going to take a short break and have a look at some of the products. All righty. So let's start off by thinking about basics of security. How basic is it? Well, imagine that you're locking your house. I know it's the one everybody uses when they're looking at security, but it's just something that we all do. So why don't we just take a very simple approach? I have a house that is locked, and I have a person that wants to get in, and they have the right key. So what we end up with here is a solution that the right person with the right key to the right content, we actually end up with the correct access. Now, I think I can probably get messages here, but you guys get this, don't you? So by all means, put those chat messages through so I can see them and know that I'm not just talking to myself here. But you get that that's the basics of what we're trying to do here. The right person with the right rights, okay, and then obviously the correct access. If we change one of those things, then it shouldn't work. Does that make sense? So if we say we have the right person but the wrong key, then they won't be able to get into the house. But that could also still be correct. You might be trying to stop that person getting into the house. So the reality is that the right person with the wrong key to the right content still gets the correct access if you're trying to restrict that access. And in some ways, think about that second option as testing your first. Now, the whole point of this isn't to teach you the basics of security. The whole point of this is to help you understand that that basic concept of those 3 things, the person, the who, the what, and the how, okay, has not changed. It does not change however deep we get into the layers of security. It will always be that combination of 3 things. But of course, we layer them out. So for example, it could be that the house is the corner of another triangle. So it could be that the house is another person. So I authenticate that person going through one layer of security. And of course, then I still give that person another key and another place that they need to be. MFA right, is a perfect example of that. So I confirm who I am with my phone or my key, and then I'm allowed to move on and move forward. I want to be able to say, hey, I hope you will get that and you understand it, but I hope that you do, and I'm sure that you do. So what does that mean to us in Office 365 or Microsoft 365? In simple terms, the person is our authenticated ID. It's who we are and how we proved to be who we are, okay? So it's a user, it's a group, it could be an email. And the key, of course, is our ability or rights. So whether we can read something or view something or edit something. So that's what that is all about. And then the container, or be a site, a library, application, etc. Of course, that's, you know, the place that we need to be to get to the information, or it could even be opening up or giving us access to the object. So I wanted to start very basically. I'm fairly sure you're all starting to go, oh yes, I understand that and I fit in. But if you've never thought about it in terms of those single points sort of architecture, you will find that as you try and you get that phone call and says, excuse me, you run SharePoint? You go, yes, I run SharePoint. I can't get to my document. I got to it yesterday and I can't get to it now. And you start to think about those three things to work out where potentially that problem might be. All right, so that's the basics. Let's kind of move on now to something called defense in depth. I mean, again, you may have heard of this, but in simple terms, it's saying that our most expensive items, or the things we need to keep more secure, we want to put deeper down into our security layers, into our defense. So from a network perspective, I may be able to dial in to the outside to get to the network, but then I have to put a password in to get to the next level, and maybe I need to put a code in to get to the next level. For those of you that are familiar with sort of VMs and Citrix and that kind of stuff, you know, you would put your secure applications in Citrix, but you would still make somebody potentially log into their laptop and then log in again to their Citrix environment. And in this case, how are we going to apply the basics of that security into our defense in depth? So I have a simple site, general documents and a secure documents. And again, simple stuff, you understand this. So solution A, remember we had that before in the basics, is read access to the site. So I am me and I have access to the site and I have these particular read rights. And in many cases, we inherit that. So solution C is still access to the same library because I just inherit the rights that I'm being get from the site. So we have inheritance to consider. But of course for D, I don't want it to inherit the same permissions. What I want to do is to say that, okay, we know who you are, we've got that authenticated, we know where you are, and we're going to change the permissions you have on that particular document. Now, that's important to understand because I'm using two triangles here. The first triangle to get me into the site and the second triangle to give me different rights to a particular document so that I can write to it or even potentially I can read it. And that's an example of how we can layer our security. Now, if we look at Microsoft 365, we can then look at all of the different kind of layers that we have available to us. So our standard SharePoint site security through kind of MS Teams has a different kind of layer of security that we're able to hide stuff, inherited permissions, shared content permissions, groups, labels, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And in a little while, we'll run through some of these layers on a different slide. But effectively, you're starting to understand that we can have different layers of security and protection. And in a perfect example, in Microsoft 365, I could well have access to an MS Teams site, but then I could share a document in that site or that SharePoint site to somebody else and give them access. And even if they don't have access to the site, of course, I have shared that document with them. So it's a layer on top of what we have, and obviously Microsoft deals with giving you that access. So the complexity comes in when, okay, how do I actually know what permissions I have on these documents if I just take one document in a library? So we're going to break that down a little bit and start to understand that a bit later on. And we're going to start looking at the syskit tools and how that can show us the kinds of different permissions we have on different content, because we might know about the permissions on our SharePoint side, but we would have to investigate somebody having access to a document because somebody has shared access to that document on their behalf. So layers of security and way of those protections. I want to briefly talk about governance. So governance is a definition of that complexity that we're building with our defense in depth, the philosophy that defines the defense that we're putting in place, and the guidance that allows other people to kind of build a security model on other SharePoint sites. And there are three basic components, and you'll be not surprised to find out that they're very similar to what we actually have in place already. So what is it that we're protecting? And there are a number of those in the list. We say this is, in our governance, we're going to protect a site level, and we're going to allow sharing, or we're not going to allow sharing, and those kinds of things are all decided around the governance. So do we know what levels are needed? So out of the box, there are a bunch of standard kind of levels that we can choose. And so we just need to think about whether the business is going to be allowed to change them, whether the security team will do it, whether it's within our compliance that the organization works within, or whether I'm the content owner and I'm basically able to go and do whatever I want. So we can make those choices. And of course, the final one that we're kind of all aware of is who makes the decisions and who approves them. And if we kind of take it up another notch here, then potentially there's a group of people that will decide the governance, that will decide who makes those decisions and approves it, and who updates the governance. And we'll talk a little bit about those when we get to later on in the presentation. What is important here for those of us, or those of you that are managing Microsoft 365 for your organization or for your small team, is that there's a role here. Because you cannot define governance, you cannot define security without understanding and talking to the business in some way. So who's going to do that? There's nobody actually between IT and the business as such. You might have some analysts and some functionalities, but they won't understand SharePoint or Microsoft 365 permissioning. So it ends up coming down to people like you and I that work within the Microsoft 365 environment or in a SharePoint environment, that kind of has to go to the business and say, hey, what kind of security do you need on this information? How important is it? How do we need to protect it? What kind of authentication do we need? And you might end up having to bring in the security team and saying, guys, what is your general message around the content we have in the organization, and how do we categorize it? So you have a role here to coordinate between those partners and those business, and it's inevitable that you end up falling into that role. So don't throw it away. It's a great role to be in. It allows you to be able to sort of understand and control and design the security that you actually want to have in place. So we're going to take a little break here now as we start to look at, in the Citrix, in the Syskit environment here, how we can sort of look and report upon those documents, and how we can actually understand what security is in place if we get to a point where we actually want to try and investigate a problem, or even just confirm that what we think is happening is actually happening.
Thanks, Steve. Let's jump straight into Syskit Point. Okay, I hope you guys can see my screen. So, yeah. So first of all, this is the home screen, and this is your starting point. It's basically an essential point for your Microsoft 365 governance. So we heard Steve mentioning a lot about the basics. So I want to start there. So if you have content, you're going to keep it in a site. That site can be connected to a team, group, or even OneDrive. What's pretty cool about the possibilities that Syskit Point gives you is that you can easily explore each site. You can just click on it. Even here, you get the big overview. But what I really want to show you is the basics and the layers Steve was talking about. So it's quite easy to generate a report. And here you see different layers. So you see the team layer, and you see that the team has a site, and that site has admins. And those admins, since this is a team, are actually the team owners. You can see it, team building owners. And the team members also have different permissions. So this is going to tell you, okay, this is my site. Those are the people that have access, and here you can see what level of access. So each column is going to tell you, is it a full control, is it a read, or is it an edit? Can they delete or can they just view the content? And this is just the first layer. And what's pretty cool that here you can actually expand all the groups. You can even see guest users. Those are the ones with the different colors. And by having this group here, you can actually see this is a public team, because basically everyone can access it. And the next thing that Steve was mentioning is going deeper in the layers. So you see that it has a document library. And this little red square actually means it's not inheriting permissions. And if I go even deeper and find the documents, I can see, okay, I have a document here. Okay, it is inheriting permissions. And this is kind of, let's say, cleverly hidden, because all the people here are actually from the parent level. But what I really want to know, what's different from the parent? And I can see, okay, somebody has direct access here, and that's Mary, and she can contribute. But there's also people that have a company link, and anyone with that kind of link can actually also access the document. And you can see that that link has actually been sent to the entire marketing group. And if we even look at the second document that we have shared, once again, unique permissions and different people with a different kind of link. So this is a specific people link. So only people that have this kind of link can actually access the document, and they cannot share it to somebody else. So this is just a small example to give you an idea actually how complex it can be. You can have direct access, you can have access to SharePoint groups, Office 365 groups. You can use sharing links, anonymous links. Even the sharing links have different kinds, company-wide, specific people. So it can get complex quite fast, but a tool like this can definitely help you decipher it. And that's all for the first part of the demo. Back to you, Steve.
I have a quick question, because I know we're probably not going to touch on it so much today. We may look at it later, but I'm presuming if you find something in there you don't like, you can just go in and change it, and you can say that person is not allowed to have that access.
Exactly. So you can basically just select anything. So you can remove the entire link, or you can remove the specific people who have access, or you can even change group members of the Microsoft 365 group.
Cool.
So basically, all of the complexities that you would have to do using different admin centers, you can do it in one central place.
Yeah, when I saw this last week, I was thinking how many times I've been onto a site and gone to the users page or the access page and downloaded that spreadsheet which has all of those shared links in, so that I, and then actually try and dig down using that information. So this is really easy and very, very quick. Thank you very much indeed. We'll speak to you a little bit later.
Thanks.
All righty, good. I have to go through the share my screen thing again and make sure that you are seeing what I expect you to see. Good, excellent, good. All righty, so we've seen how the basic model of security is put together. Let's take a quick look then at how we deliver that security, because that's our job. All right, we have Microsoft 365 environment, SharePoint site. Delivering security is our goal. So it's like talking about it and thinking about it, understanding the basics and kind of building it up on a group by group basis or on a site by site basis. Theory is one thing, but you need to build it before you bring the diamond in or you upload the document or the content. So we want to find a way of making sure we can sort of effectively protect our information. So we're going to kind of move forward now, and we're going to look at the options that we have in Microsoft 365. Remember that list we looked at earlier. So we'll pull up some of those. We're going to look at trusts and responsibilities. Again, there are things that we need to make some decisions on here around our governance. And then we're also going to look at what we call the awkward balance, or I call the awkward balance, where we're basically going to try and say about the level of security and about the level of flexibility. So let's start off with that list of layers. So this list of layers has been developing and growing, and some of these things are very new items that I'm going to talk about. Some of them are still in preview mode. So just very quickly running through the list so that you kind of understand what they are. I'm not going to get very technical on all these kinds of things because otherwise we'd be here all day and all next week. So SharePoint site security, I'm fairly certain that most of you are familiar with that, of course. But you know, you have SharePoint groups on your SharePoint sites. You put people in the groups and they get particular kinds of security. And of course, you can make changes on those if you want to kind of make them a little bit more complex. Microsoft Teams is going to use that SharePoint site security. So you kind of have Teams interface being able to manage access to those things in a different kind of way. We should also bear in mind that Microsoft over the last few years have really been trying to make these changes available for end users or for site owners without having to have, you know, that black magic, black art stuff that we used to have when we were in SharePoint because nobody else could understand it. But so there's a lot more, it's a lot easier to do now, but of course the functionality, if you want to do something more complex, then you have to kind of dig down a little bit further. Inherited permissions, I'm sure you know what that is. So if I have a document and I drop it into a library, by default it will inherit whatever the permissions are in that library. Shared content permissions, so that's when somebody would select a document and say share this with John and give John edit rights or give John read rights. We have groups, the group sites and Microsoft 365 groups and AAD, which again are allowing us to apply different kinds of permissions on objects and libraries. We have content labels. So you can say a label or a document that's been tagged with a certain kind of label can only be viewed by certain groups of people. Again, relatively advanced and incredibly dangerous because people can crack a label onto a document and all of a sudden people that were previously using that document now can't see it anymore. So again, something you need to be careful with. We have the different ways of connecting in and out of our tenant. So people guest account, which is how we share things at B2B Connect and B2B Direct Connect, where we allow people in from a tenant that we trust. So that triangle, the authentication, we're basically saying we trust anybody from that organization, and then we just decide whereabouts they're allowed access to. And so that direct connect is relatively new. You'll have seen it around shared channels probably, is probably the thing that you see most about it. Information barriers, again, relatively new. The idea of this, of course, is you can say, I'm going to split the company in half in terms of accessing this content, because this side of the company is not allowed to see anything on this side of the company regardless. And it's a very strong information barrier. So even if somebody tries to share something across there, they won't be allowed to do that. So information barriers. And then if we start getting into Azure, we get user roles and application roles, and we get inherited roles for administrations, and the list does go on. Okay, so there are a lot of complexity here, but it also means there's a lot of tools that we can use to be able to be very flexible and very complex about how we apply permissioning in our Microsoft 365 environment. So let's just look at some of those a little bit further. So some things that are going to be there whether we like it or not. They're mandatory items. SharePoint site security, Teams access, inherited permissions, groups are just examples of the mandatory ones. They need to be configured, they need to be in place, or we need to accept the default, but either way around, we can do that. We have some optional ones. I mentioned them earlier. So the direct connect, we can connect to other tenants. That might be a choice, a business choice that you need to put into play. Information barriers, as I said, is something that you can look at. It's really designed for the sort of finance world, really, where these people that are doing merger and acquisitions are not allowed to communicate with these stock dealers that are investing money, so that there's no insider dealing. But it's also useful for an organization where they have a very secure senior management team, for example, or an R&D team. So the pharmaceutical industry often has that separation. So you could use information barriers for that. And Intune, I didn't mention it earlier on the list, but Intune, of course, is another group of policies where we try and control access by device. So again, they're optional things that sort of can be brought in if you have that need. And then there's a bunch of configuration that can be done here. So I can configure the direct connect, of course. I can configure the content labels. That area, the sensitivity labels and content labels, is a very strong tool and a very precise laser security tool that you can kind of say this group of documents, this group of people, and that's it. So when you need to do that, you don't have to try and rebuild it using SharePoint sites or team sites or groups, or you can actually be more precise than that. But so there are areas that can be configured as well. Good. Hopefully that's giving you some idea of where we are with the Microsoft 365 stuff and how that can be effective. So let's move on to take a bit of a responsibility here. So we talked about governance earlier and about who makes the rules and approves and changes things, and that is important. But one of those basic rules is how much flexibility, how much ability for the business to drive their own destiny do I actually want to put into place? So the governance that you choose can drive the responsibilities that people have within the organization. So we can have it so that it's completely controlled by IT. Every time somebody wants to change something, they raise a ticket and IT provides that control and all content services, etc., etc. And very close to that is if you have a managed service. So you may outsource the management of your organization or your tenant or your on-premise services, is that what you want to do? But they manage all the security settings and responsibility. And there's a process then for the business to be able to request certain services to be built, and then they get managed. So abdicate the responsibility, let the business decide, etc., etc. Within your governance, of course, you're still able to say to that managed service provider, this is what is acceptable and this is what isn't. And of course, the one that I'm a big believer of, and if you've listened to the podcast with Maureen and myself, we have this conversation on a very regular basis about how much freedom we give to the business to do whatever they want. And I think we should give them a lot. And Maureen says no, because it causes me a problem. And he's probably now laughing at me because I know he's on the call. But yeah, so it is something that is discussed at our level, but the business also needs to make the choice here. And I think this is important. How much responsibility are you going to give to the business? What are you going to allow them to do? The obvious one. Can I create a team site without having to go to IT? Can I actually share content? Can I share something externally, etc., etc.? They're all decisions that need to be made because you've then got to work out how you're going to manage it, and it will have some knock-on effects. So, for example, you may decide that if the users are not capable of doing many things, then your backup process for your Microsoft 365 tenant needs to be something that you have full control over, because you're not giving responsibility for your site owners to look after their own content. They get lazy. So you kind of have to be able to restore documents back that they may have deleted several months ago, as opposed to trying to teach them that you now have responsibility, guys. So if you delete a document, you're doing that because you've deleted the document, and you need to kind of work out how best to sort that out yourself. So in terms of responsibility, it's very important. So when we talk about those layers of security in the tenant, then we're applying it based upon who has control of that content. So finally, then we have this awkward balance, this kind of ability here to sort of say, okay, I know what I'm going to do with all this security. I know how I want to do it. I need to work out whereabouts in my Jenga tower I'm actually going to pull the cord. So I can either completely secure and restrict it, and there are a bunch of tools there listed, from, you know, full encryption, bring your own keys, all some complex things for setting up your tenant so that it is very, very secure. And some a little bit lower down, like no guest meetings or no guest access to my SharePoint site. And of course, all of this depends upon how important and secure that data needs to be. When you go on the other side, it's completely open, transparent, and functional. So no encryption, turn off the rights management, open sharing, guest access, blah, 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 blah. All of those things are open. But of course, that's a very big gap between there. So you need to work out where the organization needs to be in the middle. Extreme zero trust with low risks, or effort to be open and fully trustworthy with a large amount of risk. And this balance is something that doesn't sort itself out. If you go and talk to the security team, they're going to be on the left. If you go to talk to the sales team, they'll be on the right, whichever way around it is anyway. But the openness, because they want to be able to get information to customers quickly and easily, and they don't care about how sensitive it is because they're just focused on making the sale. Security, of course, are focused on keeping it maintained. So working the balance out is a key attribute of this. And again, what we're going to look at now is how we can kind of work out what that governance is going to be and what that balance is, and how the product Syskit can actually help us identify whether we're passing over a line or not, or whether we actually have the kind of balance we've agreed, the business has agreed, that is actually in place. Any second now.
Yeah, let's give it a second. I hope you can see my screen. Okay, so you're back to the list of all sites. Steve mentioned a lot of options which affect security. So maybe you notice it doesn't look quite the same as it did first time. So what I did is actually added different columns, which are different security options which actually affect the security. You can easily now see here, is something connected to a Microsoft group? What's the privacy? What's the external sharing settings, which is extremely important. And it's definitely one of the things you have to decide when you want to balance things out, what the content owner can do or cannot do. Do you want to give them complete freedom or limited freedom or no freedom at all? So definitely some of the things that you have to think about. You can also see things like sensitivity labels. You can filter by that, easily see what's confidential. Besides just seeing those actions, you can even do changes, and you can do changes in bulk. Change external sharing settings, you can do it quite easily. So when it comes to all of these options, so you can see them, you can manage them from Syskit point, but there's a thing with balance. So you have to make sure that initially things are set up correctly. And this is easy to do even here with bulk select and actions. That's not a problem. But with giving a lot of freedom to the content owners, they have a lot of freedom and they can change things. And some of the things they can change can be maybe even a little bit, let's say, scary. So what you can do and how Syskit Point can help you, that you can configure alerts for some of those scary things. And you might want to be notified if somebody changes a sensitivity label on a site. And what's great about the alerts that we do, you can say, hey, I as an admin want to be notified, or maybe the other site owners, team owners, group owners should be notified. So you have a lot of possibilities to pick here. And also different options that you have here. Maybe you want to be notified if somebody changed a private team to a public. I think that we can agree that can be problematic if the person doing the change is not aware of actually the impact of that change. Also different kind of changes like changing the mentioned sharing settings that you have, changing the sharing policies, or maybe you just want to be notified if somebody is actually sharing files with external users. So a lot of options which can help you keep that control down the line all the way to the end of the life cycle. And yeah, that's basically the second part of the demo.
Excellent, thank you. Those of you that listen to the podcast, you'll know that Wendy joins Marina and I sometimes, and she just decided she wanted to come in. So if you hear her barking in the background, she thinks it's a great presentation too. So there you go. Thanks ever so much. Good. Okay, so let's go back to the last section. I'm just going to trust now, having checked a few times, that it's sharing the right screen. So I will do that, and I will also just, okay, that's not going to work. Good. Okay, so we have had a look at the basics of security. We've had a look at how we apply that security. What we really need to think about now is the fact that we need to plan to evolve because whether we like it or not, things change around us. So we may take on a partnership organization and all of a sudden they've already got a tenant, or we may have a merger and acquisition and they've got a tenant, and we need to think about how we can put those layers into place so that we can manage that security. We also want to work out how bigger customers maybe can have access and better sharing with our customer support organization. That might change. And there are a lot of people in the organization that have those great ideas without understanding that this is hard. And they just walk in the office and say, I want you to do this, please. Surely you can do that. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where somebody just assumes something is very easy. What does happen though is it does change. So we're going to basically look at how that does evolve, how we can do some monitoring, and where we get our feedback. And those things happen often and all the time. And of course, we use those to actually evolve the system to improve and to be able to move forward. So let's take a quick look at these three areas. One thing that I wanted to say very first, to make clear first, is that evolution is not an exception. Okay, so we have exceptions in our security all the time. Okay, where somebody says, oh yes, that member of the board is allowed to connect on his mobile phone and get to that data anytime without having to be a company device, for example, then that would be an exception. So evolution is a natural process of growth and continual improvement. And we're actually looking to evolve, we're looking to be better, we're looking to be stronger. Whereas an exception is actually a natural process of diversity, which usually means that we have to monitor things more closely and it costs money. So when we talk about evolution, we're not talking about exceptions here. We're talking about taking our governance within the organization and moving it on to be beneficial to the business. So which sources are going to drive your evolution? That's interesting to know, because we all say, yes, we have documents about our IT systems and about our security, and I'm sure you do. And of course, it's actually some of that documentation and reviewing through, audits and assessments and reporting that can actually give us the direction that we need to evolve into. Another one that Maureen and I often talk about actually on the podcast is the help desk, and how much information the help desk actually can help you with. Oh, that's funny. Help desk, help, yeah, whatever. But if you look at their tickets and get some reports from them and find out what people are asking for regularly and either not being able to get delivered, but that would also give you some great feedback and some options around where and what directions you can evolve into. So evolution, just remember that it's about a process of moving on, getting better, improving the process. Okay, it's not about creating an exception because one person said, this is the way that I want it to be, please, and I'm bigger than you are and get paid more money and I have a C in my job title. You need to be able to make sure that you've got the full support to evolve, as opposed to creating an exception. So we've talked about simple security of the model, we've talked about defense in depth, we've talked about how we can build our security solution, and of course we have to manage it on a daily basis. And there are two areas here that allow us to do this. We've already identified that to evolve we need to get monitoring and feedback, but also in terms of monitoring we need to know when we've broke a rule or when our governance has been compromised, or even when somebody's found a way through our security, because with so many layers now within Microsoft 365, it's so easy to miss something where somebody is able to have read access only to a file, but maybe they can share it with write access. And so they're able to actually raise the permission levels, and that's something that obviously you want to stop, but it's something that potentially might be a hole in the process. So monitoring is important. Monitoring enables compliance. So compliance, that we are compliant with our own governance. Maybe we are compliant because we're working in a particular industry with a strong set of rules. But Microsoft 365 delivers compliance, but monitoring confirms compliance. and that's important to understand. Your compliance will be referenced against your sort of specific security model. Identify the exceptions, question the shares, and basically be able to give you information you can use to be able to go check we're all safe and sound, or question mark, I'm not sure, and some more investigation is there. My only advice here is strive to simplify, not to increase your complexity. And it goes back to that evolution and exceptions. Okay, simplification means that if you actually have a good monitoring system with good focused reporting, and you've not constantly kind of building exceptions into the process, then checking off and being able to confirm to your audit team, your security team, that our security is up to scratch, then is really, really good news. And if that simplicity is there, when you want to evolve, you're just building and moving a little bit at a time. And then you can actually effectively say, hey, my monitoring, you can see the changes on a month-by-month basis. So monitoring is kind of important. Now, why is it important? Well, we do have to sleep at night, okay? And even though we can say I'm secure, I'm really happy, there are some times when you go to bed and you think, oh yeah, you know, I forgot to reset that, or somebody identified this kind of problem. And you know, one of the things that I always ask people to think about is, if your director comes to you and said, hey, are we all secure? You kind of say, yes, of course, my job depends upon it, so we're all secure. But then if, as you walk away, there's a niggly thing that you remember you didn't actually patch that print server, or you didn't actually ask your administrators whether the conditional access had been enabled that you had on your plans, blah, blah, blah. So you need to think about whether you are getting the right information, and monitoring will be able to tell you that. And of course, can you trust your content owners to do the right thing? So if your balance is over to the right, where people are able to create their own team sites and manage their own security, can you actually trust them? And the bottom line is, they can trust them to a point. I can trust them to a point. But if they need something, they will justify it as, hey, I've got a big deal on this, and they will break the rules if they certainly can. So monitoring is important because other people are doing things to your network that you need to manage and support. So if you monitor adequately, if you create the kind of reporting that you want to be able to have in place, then you will sleep at night. You can answer yes with confidence, and you will build trust in your content owners. So even though you're checking them and testing them all the time, you get to the point where, hey, I know on a regular basis that this guy for the last 4 years has managed his site, and Shirley's done a great job with her team site. We know they're not trying anything on. That is when you build trust, because you monitor adequately where they're all coming from. All right, last section. So feedback. Let's talk about that very, very briefly. Monitoring is when we purposely say, I want you to go and check, either by sort of collecting statistics, access logs, finding out whether anything's changed. We saw in the last demonstration that you know, you're able to kind of work out whether labels have been changed on some content. So there's some things here that give us feedback all the time that we need to be aware of, and we need to make sure that we're constantly looking at it. So the system feedback. So things like tacit information from your logs, Microsoft status, service tickets, compliance, etc., etc. Okay, and real-time information from your security status. You know, you have net scores and all that kind of stuff that you can look at. And human feedback. That tends to be more strategic though, and that tends to drive your evolution. So things where humans say, hey, we want to be able to do this, or I tried to do that and couldn't, or we were frustrated because we lost a deal because we were unable to share this, or whatever the reasons, that human feedback tends to drive your evolution as opposed to your system feedback, which actually confirms that you're in the right kind of place. But your system feedback can tell you a lot about where you need to evolve. So if you're, for example, seeing a lot of errors where people are trying to share a file with a particular sensitivity label, and so you get a check in the box that 25 people have tried to share this, then you could go back to the business and say, guys, I noticed you were trying to share this document. Why? What is so important in there that you need to get out? And then you're able to follow that through and support the business in terms of being able to do better things and bigger things. Trust is important though. Trust is important. It bases your decisions and you get a lot of third-party advice from people. So your administrators will give you feedback on things like, you know, people that are trying to break in or connect or failed successfully. Your help desk, I've talked about that before. They are your contact to the bulk of your business. Security teams and policy boards, they will change their mind on security on a regular basis. And those people tend to be well connected to the board and to the senior members of the organization. Architects, of course, ambassadors and champions to get you down to the coalface. The only advice I give you here is we got 2 ears. That's what God gave us, and 1 mouth. And when it comes to feedback, we need to use them in that ratio. Listen to people to find out whether they're happy, sad, frustrated, and then speak with that one voice with the assurance of where you want to sort of, you know, tell them why you made the decisions and what they can and they can't do. So let's go back to the product and find out how it can deal with helping us to evolve. Certainly the monitoring, as you can guess already, we're starting to get that, and maybe some feedback around the tacit information that we can get from our logs and our information.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So sharing my screen again, hopefully you can see it without any issues. So you talked about a lot about monitoring, and that's hard work. But the good thing is that basically Syskit Point is continuously monitoring all the Microsoft 365 services. And we basically give you this nice looking dashboard. So the question is how to evolve, how to make your security better. So there's not an easy answer, but we can help at least a bit here. So the good thing is the first thing that you have to ask yourself, what are you doing wrong? And as you can see here, it's pretty obvious that we have some issues. We have some inactive resources, we have some orphaned resources, and even other areas not concerning to security, like do I have enough storage? Do I have enough licenses? How many external users do I have? Are you performing active access reviews or lifecycle management? If you are not, then here it will say, hey, maybe you should configure that. But not just that we show you how many problems you have, and yeah, you can go here, you can, let's say, correct them manually. But if you want to get better, then you want to automate some of these things that you can do. So it gets resolved faster. So what can you do as an admin? And what Syskit Point provides you is governance automation. Basically, we allow you to create different policies that do different things, like periodically ask your content owners to do a permissions review, or make sure that each group and team has a minimum number of owners. So if somebody goes on a vacation or leaves the company, you know it's never going to get orphaned. Also, you might want to limit the max number of owners, because then people lose responsibility. Nobody feels responsible if you have too many owners. And just a quick view, each policy is highly customizable. So what do you want to actually review? Maybe only the membership, maybe only the external users, maybe you want to go to the file level and look at the file level permissions. That's from the admin level. So now I'm going to quickly switch browsers. Notice that I'm a different user here, and this user is actually a content owner. And that owner is actually going to get an email. Hey, your organization has requested that you perform a periodical review of permissions. This email will bring him to Syskit Point, where he has different tasks. And those tasks will be related to the policies you configured. For this demo, we're going to look at the access review. So I've been asked as a content owner to do it. And here is a list of sites that I'm responsible. So I'm the owner. And in this case, I'm Koi. So I have to go to each site. I get this simple view of basic information, what's the site, and then I have to start the review. Basically, the review is, I have to say, hey, these people, those are the members, owners, and guests inside the connected Office 365 group. Should I be here or not? If not, I can simply remove them. when I'm satisfied here, I can also go and check at the file level permissions. So did somebody share something at the file level? Once again, it could be a link, it can be direct access, it can be external users, internal. I can do any change straight from here. And the last step is just to confirm, hey, this is what I did. I'm going to confirm it. And this confirmation part is actually quite important because now I'm going back to the admin view. So here I'm back as an admin, and I can actually see the progress of the review. Are my content owners doing their job? Do I trust them? If I don't trust them and something's not working, maybe I want to either do the review by myself or I want to send reminders. Hey, you have to do it. And that's basically it for the last demo.
That's pretty cool, because the question in my mind was whether you can monitor the monitors, which obviously you can, and presumably when they're not doing their reviews or if they fail to do them, you're able to kind of, you know, as you said, you can remind them or basically kick them, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. We have even more possibilities. So in some cases, if you don't get a response, you can actually say what needs to happen. So let's say that you have a minimum number of owners. So if the owner doesn't do his job, what do you want to do? Maybe you want to reassign it to the manager of that owner. Maybe he'll get a little bit in trouble, but sometimes it's necessary.
I like the idea of actually reporting yearly to the managers to say, actually, these guys did really well or these guys didn't, because ultimately the manager is responsible for the data because the site owner is obviously part of a hierarchy. And it's always difficult within these environments to work out who is actually responsible for those important documents. Is it just the site owner or the site owner's boss? And it goes up to the top. So, you know, I quite like the idea of letting the managers know that, hey, they did a great job managing that site, or yeah, they could do with a little bit of training. And I think the other thing, because you've got the ability to report here, it could become a goal for them as part of their career and as part of their development within the business, and you give them a certificate and report. So that's pretty cool. So thank you very much for those demos. I enjoyed dropping them into the presentation, and yeah. I want to ask the really difficult questions, I guess, like is there anything it can't do? But maybe we'll cover that one at a later date. All right, let's get ourselves onto the home stretch. So I've just got a couple of slides here to try and finish this, and this is one of my favorite principles. It's an Asian principle called the Kano model. It's actually part of the production line and how you develop that something is adding value. And one of the reasons that I put the plan to evolve process into play was that you don't just set Microsoft 365 up or SharePoint up or any kind of knowledge management or collaboration environment and, you know, leave it be and walk away. Otherwise, there'd be lots of consultants and contractors around. But of course, organizations need to be able to evolve their IT. And of course, the whole point of cloud computing is that we can evolve it quickly. We don't have to do things on a 3-year or a 5-year investment cycle and stuff like this. So the Kano model talks about there's a relationship between the kind of functionality and the kind of value that you're going to be delivered through that functionality. So, you know, if you have kind of low functionality and the humans that are using your IT are not really caring, they're going, you know, well, what is it then? What is it we can actually do? And then equally, you can see where this is going. I might have happy humans because we go for a drink every day or something, but the functionality is working for what I need it to do, but not necessarily for everybody else. Then, of course, what we're truly aiming for is that victory slot where we have functionality that the business needs. We have humans that are getting to it very, very easily because we've got our security model correct. And so we've actually listened to the business, we've listened to the security team. I told you you had a role to do, remember? You're in the middle where you're actually delivering both of that value and both of that functionality, and the business, of course, is succeeding. Now, that's great, aim for the Kano model, and I'm fairly sure that you can probably sit down and think about what does my business need, and does my security model do it, and do I need to plan to evolve? But my last slide is a bit of a play on the Tolkien thing, because it's also, we've got so many pieces of information coming in, and one story is not a story to rule them all. You know, story, ring, rule them all. You get what I'm coming from, I'm sure. But we often get, oh, this doesn't work because my 3 people said it won't work, and you busy go around trying to make a change to meet a small group of people's problems or a small group of people's requirements. And it's never one story. So what I hope that this presentation has done, and the demonstrations that we've had of the SysKit product, is it's told you that there are many aspects, many facets to security within Microsoft 365. Our job, because we are in the center of managing that service, is to balance all of those different facets, get them working to the most efficient way, and getting the delivery of value to the business. And that is what we do as Microsoft 365 consultants, administrators, or owners of the business and the service. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you, Steve, and thank you, Mattia. That was excellent presentations from both of you. You are real stars. And now it's time for the Q&A session with Steve and Mattia. So, and please you can ask questions also during this Q&A session. So please don't hold yourself back, ask anything you might want. Steve, Mattia, you ready?
Oh, ready as you can be.
Yeah,
okay,
definitely.
Great. So I believe this goes out to Steve, and the question is from Dave. You may have covered this for viewing access to SharePoint files and folders. Is there a way to show permissions on individual users who have shared a link to someone to gain access?
I'm going to hand over to Matthew in a second because I know he's got a great way of showing this. But there is an end user way of doing it, because you can go to any SharePoint site. Yes, Wendy, my dog is telling me she wants to go out here. But there is a way of being able to sort of get a spreadsheet downloaded from each site that would actually tell you who has shared what and what the link looks like. But there's an easier way of doing that, isn't there?
Of course, it's called SysKit Point. So with that spreadsheet, you would basically have to connect GUIDs with documents. It's very hard to use. In SysKit Point, you just pick a document or pick a user and see the actions he did. So we will not just show you the permissions, but we'll also show you who shared them, who changed permissions. So you have the complete audit log.
Yeah, that's a great answer from both of you, Steve and Mattia. So this next one goes from Andre, and I believe this is for Mattia. In the demo, I have seen that for specific selections, there were no actions on the top right corner. So any specific reason?
Yeah, it's just the way the application works. So you cannot select at the same time, let's say, sharing links and people inside Office 365 groups and expect to have a common actions for those kind of options. So if you select only sharing links, you can remove those sharing links. If you select people inside the Office 365 group, then you'll see an action to remove people from Office 365 groups. So actions are contextual based on what you select.
Yeah, thank you, Mattia. So we have a big question from Nia. And the question is, we use AD security groups in site members and for providing access to files and folders via direct access for unique permissions. Site members can only share with those that currently have access. When a user leaves the service area, they are removed from the AD group. I suspect share links remain accessible for those who no longer have direct access but remain in the organization. If so, can SysKit provide tools to monitor user access and remove access in selected bulk?
So I suppose this is a question for me. I'm not 100% sure if I understand it, but what we can definitely do, we can tell you if a link has been used, we can remove links in bulk. And if I get you correctly, if it's shared with a group, yeah, then removing just a person from the group, that group will still have permissions. And if that person returns to the group, it will then gain permissions again. But If you want to discuss it in more detail, yeah, just contact us and we'll make sure to have a call on this.
Yeah, thank you, Mattia. And
it was a complicated question, to be fair. And I think that if you think of the way that Microsoft now do a lot of these securities, they kind of create a unique GUID, and they basically say this person has permission to click on that, and when they click on that GUID, it will give you these permissions. So it kind of overwrites them. It's one of those layers. But one of the things we saw earlier in the demonstration is that those links are available. And we also early on saw that if I choose one document, I can see who's got access to it. So my question to Mattia is, can we do that the other way around? Can we actually look at a person or an account and actually look at exactly what they've got access to? So
exactly, you can do that very easily with Qiskit Point. We have the list of users. You just pick a user and we'll tell you all the places on the entire tenant that the person has access. It doesn't matter if it's through a group, through a sharing link, any kind of link. And yeah, for this specific use case, it kind of depends if the link is a company-wide link or is it a specific people link. That also can have effect, but basically Qiskit Point will tell you all the places that a certain person has access, regardless of the way and which role he has.
Okay, just to get it more complicated and more tough, what about if they're an external user? So are you able to put guest accounts in there and find out what they have access to?
Exactly, you can have guest accounts, and what's pretty cool, you can have guest accounts which exist in Azure AD, and you can also see the guest accounts, those ad hoc ones which only have file level access and which do not have an Azure AD guest account.
Nice. I think all of those answers probably answer the question that was asked, but yes, it was on multiple layers. It was a great question.
yeah, definitely. So I believe with those we can wrap this session up. So once again, to both of you, Mattia, Steve, and the team here. So thank you all for joining us on today's webinar. And as mentioned, everyone who registered will receive for the event will receive the recording. And thank you again to our guest Steve Dolby for joining us today and doing a great presentation. It was a pleasure having you with us, Steve. And I wanted just to ask you, do you have anything to say before we wrap this up?
Yes, I think it's time for a whiskey.
Definitely. 6 p.m. our time here, so let's go for it. Okay. Again, thanks everyone. And if you have any further questions regarding Qiskit Point or any of our products, please reach out to us at sales@qiskit.com. It was a pleasure having you all here, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.